Hey everyone, MeltingMan234 here, and welcome to the next installment of Forgotten Media's Oz Month. For this episode, we'll be taking a look at some old Wizard of Oz comics that were made back in 1975, starting off with a comic adaptation of MGM's Wizard of Oz. Yeah, these comics are massive. They're 10 times bigger than a regular-sized comic, and close to the size of a cereal box. These fancy big ones are part of a series called Treasury Editions by Marvel, and featured a lot of their franchises like Spider-Man, The Incredible Hulk, Howard the Duck, and many others. Most of the time they were just a collection of reprints, but sometimes they would feature brand new stories, or just do comic adaptations of films like 2001: A Space Odyssey, the 1982 film adaptation of Annie, and of course MGM's adaptation of The Wizard of Oz. Now, this Oz comic is special, as this was actually the first time Marvel and DC worked together. Yeah, I bet you thought their first time collaborating would involve their superhero characters. Now, if you somehow haven't seen the MGM film adaptation of Oz, here's a quick rundown of the story. Dorothy has grown tired of living life in Kansas, thinking that her grandparents and her farmhand friends don't care for her. Then one day, a tornado comes by and blows the girl and her house far, far away, into the magical land of Oz. She is greeted by the Munchkins, who praise her for killing the Wicked Witch of the East, despite not doing it on purpose, and gains the power of the ruby slippers. But this only causes more trouble, as she is now the target of the Wicked Witch of the West, who wants those slippers. In order to escape her grasp and return to Kansas, Dorothy sets out on a quest to visit the Wizard of Oz in the hopes that he could help her. Along the way, she befriends a talking scarecrow who wants a brain, a man made out of tin who wants a heart, and a cowardly lion who just wants some courage. They overcome many obstacles, have a few encounters with the witch, and find out that the great Wizard of Oz isn't as great as powerful as he claims to be. So yeah, this comic adaptation stays true to the film's plot, and the art style is nice, capturing the likeness of Judy Garland, Jack Haley, and the others, all while taking some creative liberties, like trying to make the Witch of the West as terrifying as possible. And its use of colors are also reminiscent to the film, where it starts off in gray and blue colors, similar to how the film starts off in monochrome. Then when Dorothy arrives in Oz, it pops with color. There are a lot of differences between the comic and the film version, like in the film there's a lot of musical numbers, while in the comic version they shorten these scenes by just having the lyrics be part of the dialogue. Another difference is the design of the Emerald City, which is weird because on the back of the comic it shows the more film-accurate design, yet in the comic it's a lot smaller. In the scene where the Witch of the West first appears in Oz, she tries to take the ruby slippers only to be zapped by their power, which is a scene that happens much later in the film when Dorothy is trapped in the witch's castle. And there is one new sequence that tries to add some more proper foreshadowing to Hickory's Oz counterpart. Maybe you shouldn't really be so mad at Miss Gulch, Dorothy. After all, she's only doing what she thinks is right.
Oh, Hickory, you just got too good a heart to be mad at anybody.
Now, in the film, apparently there was this deleted scene where Hickory would show Dorothy this invention he was working on, some kind of weather machine to ward off tornadoes. I first heard about this when listening to an audio commentary on the Wizard of Oz 70th Anniversary DVD. I'm sure they might have thrown in some mentionings of hearts or oil or something, but who knows, this scene has become lost to time now, and all we're left with in the film is Hickory briefly saying, "Someday they're going to erect a statue to me in this town." Although, funny enough, there is a weather machine that you can restore in the Wizard of Oz hub world in the video game LEGO Dimensions, and it makes me wonder if that was done as a tribute to that lost sequence. Anyway, aside from those differences, it also features some bios for L. Frank Baum, the original Wizard of Oz author, and some of the actors who played the characters in the MGM film adaptation. And that's about it for this comic. It's a fun read-through. After this collaboration, Marvel decided to continue on by making another Oz Treasury book, this time adapting the second book in the Oz series, The Marvelous Land of Oz, or sometimes just called The Land of Oz, and labeling the issue to be part of the Marvel Treasury of Oz series. Yeah, not to be confused with The Treasury of Oz, which was just a compilation of some of the original Oz books. In this comic, it focuses on a boy named Tip who decides to play a prank on his cruel caretaker, an old witch named Mombi, by creating a dummy with a jack-o'-lantern for a head, who names it Jack Pumpkinhead. Mombi comes across the dummy and is about to destroy it out of rage from Tip fooling her, but she decides to try and bring it to life with her new powder of life that she got from a crooked magician. And it turns out the stuff works, as now Jack Pumpkinhead is alive. But all is not well as Mombi plans to turn Tip into a statue the next morning. Not wanting to live life as a stone statue, Tip and Jack run away from Mombi's home and plan to visit the Emerald City where the Scarecrow is now king. They bring a wooden sawhorse to life with the powder of light that Tip stole, and try to use it as a quick means of transportation, but it runs off too fast and leaves Tip behind. So now Jack meets up with the Scarecrow at the Emerald City, while Tip meets General Ginger and her army of women, who plan to conquer the Emerald City, which they manage to do so with no problem. So now it's up to Tip, the Scarecrow, and many others to reconquer the Emerald City, while discovering who the real ruler of Oz is. At first I thought since the first comic was an adaptation on MGM's Oz, then this comic would be their own adaptation of the Land of Oz. But surprisingly, this comic stays very faithful to the original book. The only connections it has with the MGM film is using the likeness of the Scarecrow and the Tin Man. Which is funny because the comic also features Glinda, but they designed her and how she looks like in the Oz books rather than how she looks like in the MGM film. I bet that confused a lot of people back in 1975. Of course, this wouldn't be the last time that something like this would happen, because years later, the Shirley Temple Storybook series featured the MGM designs of the Scarecrow and Tin Man in their adaptation of The Marvelous Land of Oz. Anyway, the artwork is still nice, still designing the Scarecrow and Tin Man as their MGM counterparts, while the other characters stay close to their Oz book designs. It makes you wonder what these new characters would have looked like if they were featured in an MGM sequel, if that ever was. But aside from that, there are a lot of panels that basically recreate most of the illustrations that were from the book version. There's only like one or two things that are cut, such as the ongoing banter between the Sawhorse and Jack Pumpkinhead, while other scenes are shortened, such as the various attempts from Mombi to try and stop Tip's party from returning to the Emerald City. There's definitely a lot of narration boxes in this comic, much more than the previous one, which kinda drags it down in my opinion. Heck, there's this one scene where one of the Sawhorse's legs breaks off from getting stuck in a rabbit hole, and then the next time we see him, he's fine, and now Jack's missing a leg, so the editor had to shove in this note by saying, "Oh yeah, we forgot to tell you, they decided to give the Sawhorse one of Jack's legs." Yeah, that was weird. Speaking of which, there's a whole page dedicated to one of the editors on this comic, basically explaining the differences between the MGM film and the Oz books to help people that were confused, and saying that they'll continue to adapt the next couple of Oz books into comics, while getting MGM's approval of using the likeness of Dorothy, Scarecrow, the Tin Man, and the Lion from their film adaptation. That's right, the next comic was going to adapt the third book, Ozma of Oz, but unfortunately those plans were cancelled, mostly due to copyright issues, so they only made 2 Treasury editions on the Oz books. And it seemed like this would be the end of adapting the Oz books into comics. But many years later, Marvel decided to revisit the Land of Oz by releasing a new series of comics that began in 2009. I haven't checked out these comics yet. I have seen a lot of images of the panels and their interesting art style. Although sometimes they can make the characters look pretty creepy, like the Wheelers. Man, they look even more demented than the ones from Disney's Return to Oz. I know the series only adapted the first 6 original Oz books before it ended, which is kind of ironic as the author L. Frank Baum originally planned for the Emerald City of Oz to be the last book in the series, but due to financial problems and fans still wanting to see more adventures of Oz, he decided to continue on for a while. The prices for these Treasury comics have varied. Sometimes they're cheap and other times they're expensive. I found these in an old comic store during my college years, and they were bundled together for only $25. And as far as I know, there's no official digital release or reprints of these comics. But yeah, that covers the Marvel Treasury of Oz comics, and for what they are, they're nice comic adaptations of the MGM film and the second Oz book. They're definitely worth reading if you're a big Oz fan. Well, that concludes today's episode of Forgotten Media. See you next week on our next trip to the Land of Oz.